Okay, so the recording is started. By doing that, I would hand over to Marco and Alessandro, who will be your chairs in this session. Enjoy the session. Marco, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thanks, Vado. I will start with the presentation. So, good morning, everyone. So we are here to present this webinar on OpenStreetMap and its synergies with Inspire. So I'm Alessandro Sarretta, and with me there's Marco Minghini. And we will presenting this comparison between OpenStreetMap and Inspire with some the differences and the synergies between these two words. Something in common. So both of us are part, more or less, of both the words. I'm a researcher at the Italian National Research Council, but I'm also a volunteer in the OpenStreetMap. And I worked for 3 years at the GRC, within the group dealing with Inspire. And Marco Minghini, he's a scientific project officer at the GRC, and he's also a volunteer, and he published a lot of research on the OpenStreetMap. So we're dealing with both the sides of this word. I see a comment asking about hearing talking. Can you hear me? Okay, good. So we have the next slide. So, yes, this is the structure of the today workshop. We will start with a few questions on Slido, and then we will have the biggest part on this parallel comparison between OpenStreetMap and Inspire, seeing how much these parallel lines are meeting or not. Then we have a more practical exercise with data from a specific example on addresses, and then a final session of more questions with Slido. And we will try to have the two voices talking. So I will play the OpenStreetMap guy, and Marco will be the Inspire guy. While in the third part, Marco will be presenting the exercise, the more concrete exercise. So let's start with Marco presenting the first Slido questions poll.
Thanks, Alessandro. And yes, let's immediately move to Slido. So take your smartphone and let me go to the presenter mode. Okay, I can activate the first question. So please take your smartphone and be ready to answer. We would like to warm up a bit with you and starting to ask you where you actually work, public sector or government, research or academia, business or other, just to have an idea of who is attending this webinar. So I will leave it open for some seconds until we get, let's say, a representative sample of answers. It looks like the majority of you are from public sector or government, which is somehow expected. But there's also almost a 20% from research or academia, which is quite nice to have, and less people from business. Okay, we have 45 replies. I think the picture is quite clear. So I would go to the next question, or someone still answering. Okay, I would go to the next because I think it's quite clear where you come from. Next question is, how familiar are you with Inspire? Of course, this is the Inspire conference, but given the nature of this workshop, we might have also people that are less familiar with Inspire and more with OpenStreetMap. So the answers, the possible answers are: I know Inspire well and I have experience in using the data. Of course, this is the most rated one, as expected. I know what Inspire is, but I have little or no experience in using the data. And I have never heard about Inspire before this webinar. Of course, this is 0%, and we hope it will stay at 0% unless there is someone really only passionate about OpenStreetMap with no experience in Inspire. So good to see that there are lots of people with experience also in using the data, but some people also knowing what Inspire is, but with little or no experience in using the data. That would be interesting also, especially for the second part of the workshop, where we will actually use some data. So again, we have around 50 participants, so I think we can switch to the next, which is the same question, but about OpenStreetMap. How familiar are you with OpenStreetMap? Same answers that you can choose. So here we expect that someone will maybe only expert of Inspire with few or little knowledge in OpenStreetMap, or maybe you have knowledge in OpenStreetMap, but you have never used the data in practice. Good to see that the percentages are very close to those from the previous question. So most of you, 60%, also have experience in using OpenStreetMap data. Would say this is less expected than the previous one. So almost the very same result of the previous question. For 47 participants, we can, well, there's also someone that have never heard about OpenStreetMap. That's also good to know. Can I just ask you to mute your microphone, please, if you are not speaking? Thanks. And then the very last one for the moment is about your expectations for this webinar. So what are you expecting? Get more knowledge on Inspire, get more knowledge on OpenStreetMap, understand what are the similarities and differences between the two, or understand how they could be integrated. Here you can select even more than one. Okay, that's the reason why the percentages do not sum up to 100%. You can select, I think, at most two answers. So feel free to edit your answers if you just selected one and you want to change. So good, we have 50 participants. I think the picture is clear and is the one we expected. So you want to understand better how, first of all, what are the similarities and differences, and how you could integrate the two data sets, and what are the opportunities and the challenges in doing that. And then we have some people that, of course, do not know one of the two and would like to get more knowledge on both. Thanks. I will pass back the presenter role to Alessandro, or ask Vlado to do that for the first part of the workshop. Thanks.
So here we are. I will share again my screen, just a confirmation that you can see that. Perfect. So, as Marco was saying, we have this. We had this idea to compare the two words and to have a more concrete example. Given the answers, probably many of you already know quite well, it seems, OpenStreetMap. So maybe I will try to be a bit quicker on the more general things about OpenStreetMap and have maybe more specific, add more specificities to more details on OpenStreetMap, and then we'll have the part 3. That's probably the most interesting part for you on the use of some data from the both sides. So we followed a comparison using some criteria that you see on the screen, and that were used also on the paper you see down there from last year. That was about comparing Inspire OpenStreetMap. And there was also a presentation at the FOSS4G in Bucharest last year by Marco and Alex Kotsev with a slight different perspective. So this year we wanted to have this comparison and presenting a bit more detailed OpenStreetMap. So these are the criteria. Looking at the differences or synergies in the overall approach, the spatial scope, the data structures, and the way of encoding, how we can access data from OpenStreetMap and Inspire, and the licensing. First slide on OpenStreetMap, what it is. So it's the most, and it's the wider and most popular project on volunteer geographic information. It started by Steve Coast in the UK, and it was initially about streets. So the name.
Sorry, I'm not seeing the slide anymore. I'm just seeing
really?
your webcam.
So you cannot see the slides?
When you switch to the next slide, we lost the screen connection. At least I did.
So one thing to do is maybe close my webcam. Can you see now?
Not yet.
Sorry for that. Oh, Marco, we are back with some issues with the network. So I think without trying strange things, it may be better you to share the screen. Sorry.
Okay. Vlado, can you give me back the presenter role?
Yeah, there's something wrong with the internet or the settings. Sorry for that.
No problems. Let me start back from here. So here we are.
Okay. Waiting for the. Okay, so we were on the first OpenStreetMap slide. I'm seeing also already.
Alessandro, are you with us? Alessandro?
No.
Alessandro, we lost you for a while.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I think you can move to the first slide about Inspire.
Okay, because we didn't hear anything about OpenStreetMap. So if you want maybe to summarize again.
Yeah. So the project started in the UK about streets only at the beginning, and then it moved as a free geospatial database for the whole world, more or less about everything you can map on a territory.
Okay, what is Inspire is probably very well known in this context, so we'll not really spend so much time. I just want to point you to the fact that the directive, as you know, entered into force in 2007 and was already in preparation for a few years before. So in a sense, it was born at the very same time as OpenStreetMap. That started in 2004, as Alessandro said, but started to develop as a big project in the years, in the following years.
Okay, so let's start with the overall approach by OpenStreetMap. These are the principles. So it's mainly about starting with a local knowledge of your territory. It's really has a focus on the local knowledge of the community or the mappers. Of course, then you can use information also from satellite images and other means to add information, but it really has also from a collaborative point of view, a focus on the territory where the mappers or the volunteers are living. It's a community-driven project with a bottom-up approach where there is a coordination worldwide made by the OpenStreetMap Foundation at the national level. In some countries, there's a coordination at the national level for the activities, but mainly volunteers are driving the community and the project by bottom up. And it has a strong focus on the open data with a open database license that practically says that you can use and reuse the data for whatever means, given that you give attributes to the data and you share it as it is. So it's an open license. It's one of the reasons why the OpenStreetMap data can be reused widely in every context. And as we mentioned, it's a database. It's really about data. Then we have a map. That is something. It's the first thing users usually see. Usually, you can think about or you can hear about OpenStreetMap as an alternative to Google Maps, but it's not the main point on OpenStreetMap. It can be an alternative. You can use it as an alternative, but it's not only a map. If you can think about OpenStreetMap more as the Wikipedia of maps, because the approach, the openness is the same, and the way people collaborate, it's more similar to Wikipedia. Then, so we have a default map, the one you see at www.openstreetmap.org. But if you want to look inside, you can switch to looking at the data. The geospatial data can be easily seen on the screen, and beside each of those elements, you can have, if you click, Marco, the specific information, metadata, let's say, about each of those attributes and geospatial features. And next. So we have the default map. Again, this is we changed from Rome to Padova, but again, in the main interface, you already have 4 different flavors of OpenStreetMap map. We have cycle map, we have the transport, we have the humanitarian flavor of OpenStreetMap, but you have many services that can present the data behind OpenStreetMap in different way. Here we have an example about a map oriented to snow in the mountain, so with a specific infrastructure related to snow. And then we can have also a map dealing with the 3D dimension of OpenStreetMap. So in the last click, you will see a link below where you have a long list of all OpenStreetMap-based services, really entering into the details and giving you your personal flavor that you can also build by yourself using data in OpenStreetMap. Yes, Marco, there's also the European Commission has a flavor of OpenStreetMap reflecting official position on European Commission, for example, for some specific boundaries between states that in OpenStreetMap are mapped in a certain way, and European Commission slightly modified because of official position between countries. About community. So we said that OpenStreetMap is about community, is a community-driven approach. It's a wide community of volunteers. There are more than 6 million of registered users. Of course, not all of them are active users, but if you see the figure before, we have more than 100 million edits per month in the world. Statistics are really impressive in some way. And next slide. Yes, and there's not only the concrete action of editing the map. There are more than 100 mailing lists to discuss, interact, confront with local, national, international, thematic communities inside OpenStreetMap. There's a forum. There are conferences around the world. There's one annual World Conference called State of the Map. The map is OpenStreetMap, of course. There are continental, regional, and national conferences, and there are also a lot of local meetings that are happening daily, let's say. And there's not only the volunteer world. So there are also businesses that are working with or on OpenStreetMap. And here we see 3 examples, Mapbox, Telenav, Strava. They are different perspectives, more on the infrastructure or the sport-oriented like Strava. We have Amazon Logistics that are, they are investing a lot on the last mile mapping. Here there's a wiki page on the OpenStreetMap wiki with all the name of users officially working on this for Amazon Logistics, so we can track who from Amazon is editing on the map. And we have Facebook. Maybe I don't know if you are aware of this, but the map behind the location in Facebook, it's OpenStreetMap. If you click on the map on the eye, the small eye, you will see the OpenStreetMap attribution. And Facebook is not only using OpenStreetMap, but it's also contributing recently with this initiative, Rapid ID. That's an editing tool using artificial intelligence to create a prediction of, for example, streets that can be reused to be included in OpenStreetMap. And then there are different ways on how to contribute. With outdoor mapping, the field mapping, maybe it's the more common and funny way to contribute to OpenStreetMap. Then there's so-called armchair mapping. It's about digitizing objects using openly licensed imagery that you can use on your screen PC. And there's there are the imports, bulk imports that are reusing open data compatible with the OpenStreetMap license to be included in block with a bulk import into the OpenStreetMap database. It's a delicate operation to be dealt with caution, and it's mainly for expert user, but it's a big support for OpenStreetMap, being able to include the open data from authoritative or other data systems. And then there's a huge ecosystem of services that can be used to edit information or reuse information, like mobile smartphone apps or similar. Then one final slide. It's about data quality and how to check if the information that's automatically updated in the database immediately. So everyone registered can edit the database, and it will be available, that edit, for anyone immediately. So everything in OpenStreetMap is traceable and archived. So each and every edit called change set in the OpenStreetMap is saved and can be viewed, assessed, commented, or reverted if something is really wrong. And there's also a managing group, the data working group, that can deal with accusation of copyright infringement, imports, and vandalism, and it's working. And there are several tools to help in analyzing, validating, and checking the quality of edits.
Alessandro, I saw a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Maybe you can already answer. The question was, who is the community?
Yeah, the community is all the people participating in OpenStreetMap, organized in different ways. But the OpenStreetMap Foundation is just a foundation guiding, coordinating the efforts, helping in structuring the rules that the community itself, discussing in the mailing list and the forums, are doing. So the community are the people working on OpenStreetMap. There are some structure and managing because it's a worldwide project. I don't know if Marco want to add anything else on that.
Well, no, I think that the information you showed that there are, I don't remember how many mailing lists on OpenStreetMap from the continental to the local level is sufficient to justify what the community is. There are really thousands or if not tens of thousands of discussions going on daily by email between communities.
Yeah, I think about import, there are guidelines and rules to respect to have a solid import. So this is something maybe we can also discuss later. I forgot to tell that we will try to have a formal discussion after the presentation, but keep asking questions on the chat. Some of them maybe we can try and answer immediately. I will track them and maybe let's try to answer to some of them at the end anyway of the presentation.
Okay, Inspire, again, I will try to go quite fast, or at least faster, because this should be quite well known. The approach is completely different. Of course, Inspire is a top-down initiative, is a directive, so there's a legislation in place, and the member states had to transpose at the local level, so the implementation can be enforced. According to the Inspire roadmap, the full implementation is for 2020. We still see it as a process with an increasing number of data sets and services provided on and increasing on a daily basis. Similarly, in a sense to OpenStreetMap, we also have a growing community in Inspire. At the moment, we have more than 7,000 data providers who have provided data sets to the infrastructures, and this number is also increasing. And we also have an annual conference, as you know very well. Unfortunately, this year is only a virtual one.
Yeah, now about the spatial scope of OpenStreetMap. We said already that it's a database, and it's one of the richest and most diverse database. How about what is the content of OpenStreetMap and what's inside? Let's say that any verifiable object with a physical location can be mapped, and it's really like that. We go from the land use, buildings, streets, to the waste basket on the road. There are several hundred of spatial object types, but it's not about historical events and no raster data. It's something that you can find on field mapping, or you can verify by yourself. So no elevation, no distribution of pollutants, and no data from sensors. And there are a list of maintained or an updated map feature, let's say. I wanted to show you live the page, but you see here the screenshots. If you go to that page, you will see a long list of things, hundreds, thousands of them, and the ones you find here are not all of them, because it's a really a wide opportunity to map everything, more or less everything you can find.
Okay, in Inspire, the spatial scope is different because Inspire is focused on 34 cross-cutting and cross-sectoral categories, which in the Inspire jargon are called spatial data themes. These should not be thought as data sets or themselves, but as categories of data sets. In total, we have about 340 different spatial object types together in all these 34 spatial data themes. The spatial scope, I was saying, is different because Inspire is an environmental directive. So it's a directive that aims to support environmental policies in the EU. Therefore, we don't find data sets like POIs, like restaurants or shops, hotels. So for example, we do not find those kind of data sets in Inspire, which on the other side opens already a lot of space for possible integration between the two sources. We also have raster data in Inspire. We also have historical data, which means data that does not exist anymore in the real world. And that's a difference compared to OpenStreetMap. And we also have dynamic data, not just static data, but also dynamic data like spatiotemporal observations. And these 34 spatial data themes, for those that are less familiar with Inspire, are classified into 3 annexes. Annexes because they are the annexes to the directive. Annex 1 and Annex 2 include baseline information. Annex 3 includes more domain-specific information.
Yes, let's move to the third aspect of this comparison. It's about data structure. It's probably one of the most important thing because OpenStreetMap has a flat data structure, so it doesn't have complex features or complex models behind, and that's very easy to be transformed through GDAL or other means and tools. So in several formats, this is a great plus. And any object is described by 3 main primitives. There are nodes, ways, and relations. You can see on the picture here that you have node are points. You can have a way as a polyline, and a closed way can be a polygon, like a building, as in this case. Then on top of that, you have tags. So it's a simple attribute based on a key value pair. Like you see in the picture, you have a building equal yes, says that way, a closed way is a building. Or in the nodes, you see highways equal bus stop, it's a bus stop. Or for the way, you can have, of course, more than one tag. A highway can be of a type residential, and the name is Via Achille Grandi. About relations, you can link elements from different types of geometry, linking them so that they are a route. So the bus stop can be part of a route of a specific bus, the B56, for example. And yes, what about data validation? It's related to the quality of data and who can do what on Inspire, on OpenStreetMap. There's only basic data validation in the database, for example, about topology, and the tags are really flexible. So each one can introduce new ones. There's no block to do that. Of course, there's a collaborative reference documentation on the wiki, and only the tags that are shared and agreed in the community can really spread around in the map. And so this is the way on how in OpenStreetMap tags and attributes can be implemented. There's a lot of discussion on mailing lists, specific mailing list on tagging. It's a complex thing if you want, but it's really important. And And there are tools and services to evaluate the spread of tags, like this tag info. It's a way to see how many points, ways are containing specific tags in the combination of tags that can describe complex things, and everything is mapped and can be retrieved from the database.
Okay, that's Inspire. In terms of conceptual data models, again, we have quite substantial differences compared to OpenStreetMap. In Inspire, all the 34 spatial data themes are modeled in UML, which, as probably many of you know very well, allows for complex data structures and actually makes GML the default encoding for Inspire data. But today, after many years since the entry into force of the directive, of course, the technological trends have radically changed, and we are already exploring the opportunities to have alternative encodings, which means other encodings that depart from the same UML conceptual data models. And some work has already been done to define a GeoJSON encoding, and some member states also are working on the definition of a geopackage encoding. Why? Of course, because GML data sets are not easily be consumable by mainstream GIS software, both desktop and web, because of the traditionally not flat data structure. So the alternative encode, the idea of the alternative encodings is exactly to define a flattening of the complex schemas of Inspire in order to facilitate the consumption into GIS software. And I'll show you an example of that in the second part of this workshop. Another difference compared to OpenStreetMap is that in Inspire we have central components. For example, we have the registry that stores the persistent identifiers of all the components that are used in the UML models. For example, the code list, that's a clear example. In OpenStreetMap, you can have an endless number of tags. As Alessandro said, you can add as many tags as you want to an object. In Inspire, you usually have code lists that are kept or maintained officially on the registry, and some might be extended, but even the process of extending a code list is a formal one. And then we have a validator, kind of a reference validator, or a certified, let's say, an Inspire official software in that member states use to validate their resources. So while in OpenStreetMap you have a database and you have an ecosystem of tools that is growing, let's say, around that database, in Inspire we have central official, let's say, certified components. Alessandro?
Sorry. Yeah. One slide about data coordinate reference system. OpenStreetMap has all the data in WDS84 with no 3D components, so it's compatible, let's say, with others from this point of view. Everything is on the same CRS.
In Inspire, of course, things are different because while OpenStreetMap is a worldwide project, Inspire is clearly a European one. Therefore, some specific two-dimensional and three-dimensional pan-European CRSs are defined in Inspire, and datasets should be provided in those reference systems. There's currently a proposal to provide, make data providers able to provide datasets in additional coordinate reference systems under some conditions, for example, that those reference systems are kept and maintained into a register, and that the parameters to transform to and from the original ones are well known. That would be actually great for data providers that in order to, let's say, free them from the obligation to maintain datasets in both national and the Inspire reference systems, and also, of course, would be granted by the fact that there are libraries and tools available in mainstream GIS to really easily change between and transform datasets between reference systems.
So we haven't touched really how to input data in OpenStreetMap, but we touch it really saying there are different ways to map things, and then there's a way to upload. But it's really important how to use data from OpenStreetMap. And with a comparison with what Marco will say about Inspire, there are no metadata catalogs. Everything is based on search on tags and, of course, location. But all the tags and the combination of tags can help to retrieve information from the database. And there are several ways to access these. The simplest way is to go on openstreetmap.org, and there's a button that even if you are not registered, you can export the part of the map you can see on the screen. You have to zoom a bit because it's not allows you to download the whole word in this way. Then there are more advanced way to extract information. There are some services that provide you with extracts, so you can extract the whole Italy, the whole Europe, a region inside Italy. So with a simplified approach, you can download, for example, the compressed PDF file, the specific encoding of the OpenStreetMap, or shapefiles, for example, from these services. So it's easing the way you consume the data from OpenStreetMap. Then you can have a bulk download of everything. And you have these planet files. There are tens of gigabytes of as a XML or PDF files. But not only, so in that case, you will download the current situation of OpenStreetMap for the whole world, the whole map, the whole database now. But you can also download the complete OpenStreetMap data history. So everything from the beginning of a project in one file. And you see that it's 136 gigabyte. I think I extracted this yesterday. So it's a huge amount of data that you can really process with some specific tools developed for OpenStreetMap, and you can track everything on that. And then there are more modern and helpful ways to access the data, only the data you want without downloading everything. And there are APIs developed. There are a couple of them, mainly the OSM API and the Overpass API. And there are other platforms that can help you to extract also information about history, like an awesome platform. And then there is a tool that I think it's the way you can access specific things in OpenStreetMap. That's Overpass Turbo. I wanted to show you one thing, but I think it's not really important. Just to say, you can see, or more or less on the screen also, that you can combine tag information to extract specific things. There you have museums. So the tourism equal museum tag will extract only the points or polygons that are respecting that tag combination. And then you can really have more complex queries to extract geographically or with bounding boxes, or with some distances from one point. You can extract really everything, and it's quite simple at the beginning, can be quite complex, but it really helps you to extract only the part of the database you want in a specific area.
Okay, there are also multiple ways to extract data in Inspire. Actually, as most of you know for sure, the architecture is based on the OGC standards for geospatial interoperability, and we have a service-oriented approach where usually data stays at the data provider side and then is harvested We have network services in Inspire, first of all, to discover the data through metadata, as Alessandro was mentioning. And then we have view services to view, to access the data, and download services to download the data. In Inspire, we are also closely monitoring the new developments in terms of OGC API. That is a new family of standards that OGC is working on. At the moment, there's only one standard published, that is the OGC API features, which will basically be let's say, the substitute of WFS. In Inspire, there's already an action that has just started in the work program on exploring the possibility to create Inspire download services based on the OGC API features standard. Then we have the Inspire GeoPortal that you see on the right hand side of the slide, that is acting as the main Inspire client. So it's the main point of access to the whole data sets and services provided by the infrastructure.
Yes, data licenses, it's also quite important to highlight. OpenStreetMap is a database with a fully open access and a fully open license. Since late 2012, the data inside the database is under the Open Database license. Before it was a Creative Commons attribution share-alike license. This move had a big discussion in the community, but in any case, the openness of the database, it's really an issue. And I saw also some questions on the chat. One big thing that the community is trying to have is to keep an eye that everything entering in the OpenStreetMap it's respecting this database. So not to include something that could be not inside the database. But it's a big point, positive point for OpenStreetMap, being able to let anybody use the data from it.
Okay, Inspire instead does not mandate the use of one specific license, with the result of a quite heterogeneous infrastructure where only a portion of the data is actually open data. I have to say that only a portion of the licenses are standard licenses like ODBL or CC0 or CC BY. We also have very custom licenses, sometimes very country-specific licenses, and I've also seen licenses only written in national languages, so very hard to understand, or very hard to really, or very custom, so that when it comes to putting together or using together different data sets, then it's sometimes very hard to understand what are the conditions according to your specific use case or requirement. That means that in terms of what we could term the licensing interoperability, that is unfortunately not directly available, not directly ensured in Inspire.
Yes, this is a summary of everything we tried to tell you in the previous slides, with the characteristics, the criteria we used, and how Inspire and OpenStreetMap are dealing with those characteristics. I'm not reading again this, but it's just a summary for you to have in one slide everything we tried to express previously. So there's no need to move the presentation role to Marco, but now we are starting the third part on using the data and having a concrete example on addresses.
Thanks a lot, Alessandro, and also thanks to the audience that is particularly active in the chat. I like the fact that there are already some typical kind of discussions on aspects such as the openness or the licensing or the pan-European aspects. So there are many different aspects that really bring many interesting discussions, and that was also one of the purposes of this workshop. So to trigger discussions between the two communities and to show that there are many points of contact and intersections between the two. Alessandro will now maybe try to moderate the chat or to answer the questions, so feel free to ask, and then hopefully we will spare some time at the end for a Q&A session. Let's see. I hope that this second part will also answer some of the questions that have appeared in the chat until now. So we are going basically to show you a step-by-step exercise with this purpose. The purpose is really to prove that OpenStreetMap can be used as a data source to integrate, to complement, and or to update authoritative data sets, including Inspire, of course. Why? So your question could be, why should I put together those two different data sources? First of all, because there are differences in spatial scope, as I as I mentioned already before. So there might be simply cases where something is not available in Inspire and it is in OpenStreetMap, or vice versa. So if you really need to make an analysis combining data sets from the two, you might want to integrate them. There are differences in data quality. These, I mean, differences in the two directions. On one side, authoritative data sets are clearly quality certified. They come from a very rigorous process. They are documented with metadata. So basically, they are official data, and crowdsourcing comes with a lot of uncertainties on data quality. But on the other side, crowdsourcing and crowdsourced data like OpenStreetMap is also proven to be of high quality, or that can reach high qualities in certain conditions. For example, think to aspects such as completeness, or up-to-dateness of data. Crowdsourcing is or might be and is in many cases outperforming authoritative data. Suppose, for example, to the case of maps, land use maps, or even urban databases that are only updated every month, some months, or every few years. In the official data sets, in OpenStreetMap, a new road, a new land use area can be really added and mapped in few seconds. So there's a lot of literature, of course, and I don't want to enter the details, but the quality of OpenStreetMap can be as high as those for authoritative datasets. I have one next slide that will hopefully clarify that. And then there are differences in availability and licensing. For example, it might be that you need to use a data set that is not available in the Inspire GeoPortal, for example, or that maybe is available or in the Inspire GeoPortal or at the data provider side, but maybe you have to pay if you want to use it and you can't afford to pay. Or maybe you have it available, but the license is not open. Or maybe the license is open, but as soon as you want to put it together with something else for your specific application, for example, a commercial application, then you might have issues. So there are multiple reasons why you could integrate the two data sources, and I'm sure that all of you are already thinking about your specific data sets or domains or use cases or requirements. What I'm going to show you in the following is a step-by-step where we will do 4 different things. With a very specific example on addresses data. Of course, this is just one of the many examples that we could do. It's quite a simple one. We will basically start with a comparison of the data models between OpenStreetMap and Inspire. We will load or download those data sets in QGIS. We will perform some ETL transformations to align the data models. And in particular, we will use OSM as the target data model, and then we will integrate the two data sets. Again, a very simple example that we hope to be able to show you in some minutes here, but it should allow you to understand how you could, of course, extend it to other data sets, other themes, or other domains. Before really starting with the exercise, let me just mention this relevant study on OpenStreetMap that has been recently done and completed by the Commission. It was called the Project Evaluation of EU Gazetteer. It was managed by the GRC and Eurostat, supported by contractors and also funded by the ELISE action of the ISA Square program. The purpose of this project was mainly to expand the authoritative database of gazetteers that is used to support many Commission services, looking at alternative data sources, including OpenStreetMap. This is to say that the very first important task was a comparison between INSPIRE or authoritative datasets on one side and OpenStreetMap datasets, and in particular addresses on the other side. And the comparison was done for datasets of 6 member states: Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, Spain, and Czech Republic. Of course, I use the word INSPIRE/authoritative just to mention the fact that sometimes in this study, the data sets were not available directly in the INSPIRE geoportal, but were directly retrieved from the national geoportals or directly requested to the National Mapping Agency. So it's authoritative data sets in general. And then also in that study, the data sets were transformed. And in particular, again, the OpenStreetMap was used as the target data model. What are the results of this study? The results are that, well, it's one of the many results, of course. I'm just extracting what is relevant to this specific workshop. But again, this exercise showed that the data sets are complementary. So there's a lot of potential for their integration. And also there are some more specific conclusions on OpenStreetMap. This is also to answer some questions in the chat on how to ensure the completeness of OpenStreetMap data in general. The answer is that we cannot ensure it in general. Of course, it's a crowdsourced project. In a sense, the world is changing every day, every moment. So mapping is in a sense never completed as a process, because there's always something new to map, especially if you think at the level of detail provided by OpenStreetMap. But literature shows some very clear and very well-known trends. Completeness is heterogeneous in general, but it is typically lower than authoritative datasets in rural areas, less populated areas. It is usually as high as or higher than authoritative datasets in urban areas. What is the reason? Typically, the reason is that in urban areas, there are more people living. So there are more people actually being there. But there are also more people actually visiting those areas because they are the city centers. They are more popular, okay? They are more interesting to map. So there's usually a lot more of mapping activity in city centers. So to answer in a nutshell, again, the completeness is heterogeneous, but typically very unbalanced between between rural and urban areas. But of course, there are big differences across countries and regions because it really depends on local communities. So there might be rural areas very well mapped in OpenStreetMap as well. But this is more a general conclusions. Some results of that specific study. What you see in the maps here is the ratio between the number of OSM and the number of authoritative addresses datasets for each 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer cell. So it's really just a count of the addresses here. On the left, you have Czech Republic. On the right, you have Netherlands. It's very clear that for many cells, you have this dark blue color. I'm sorry for the legend that is not very visible, but this blue color means higher than 100%. So it means there is more data in OpenStreetMap than in the authoritative data set. And if you look at the Netherlands case on the right, that's a very interesting case that attests something that Alessandro mentioned before. One of the ways to add the data to OpenStreetMap is through import of, for example, governmental data. This is what happened in the Netherlands in the case of addresses. Some years ago, there was an import. So basically, all the authoritative addresses database was moved into OpenStreetMap. Of course, as Alessandro said, this is a very delicate process that should be prepared in advance. Existing or possible conflicts with the data already in OpenStreetMap should be very well in advance thought and solved. The role of the community is very important. It should be documented and so on and so forth. But basically what happened is that the authoritative database was moved into OpenStreetMap, and from that moment on, it is managed by the OpenStreetMap community. There are also cases where the government then, of course, takes back the data from OpenStreetMap or just looks at the updates happening in OpenStreetMap. Let's come to the exercise now, and the first step, that was the comparison between the data models starting from Inspire. Let me just maybe move to the browser, because I think I will be able to show, yeah, it's a bit bigger. So I hope you can see the data model from addresses. It's not my intention, of course, to go into the details of the UML, but on the other side, I should try, and I have to try to summarize the main features, because they will be important for the comparison, of course. So I hope not to be too boring or too long on that, but let me try to describe how this is done. So addresses, it's Annex 1 from Inspire. There's one main feature type here, that is address, and an address can have in Inspire different components. There are 4 subtypes of these address component feature type that basically are the 4 parts needed to define an address. The first is the thoroughfare name, which is typically the name of the street. There's the address area name that can be used to define the place, like a village or the settlement where the address is. There is the postal descriptor, of course, used to identify an address. And then there's the admin unit name. The admin unit name is the administrative units, or are the administrative units defining an address. There's a code list here that defines 6 different orders. So from the country, that is the first order, up to the, let's say, the lowest administrative level. There is also a constraint, very important here to mention, that this address country constraint basically says that the country should be there. Okay, so an address is at least identified by a country. Then what is important here is that the real identifier, the human readable identifier of an address, is given by this attribute, the locator attribute of the address feature type. The data type is address locator. If we go to address locator, we see that there is a designator whose data type is a locator designator. If we go to the locator designator, we have basically a designator attribute and a type, which is the locator designator type value. And the locator designator type value, that is where I wanted to go at the end, is here. It's a code list that basically tells what is the identifier for your address. Okay, so it could be the address identifier general, or the address number, or the address number extension, the building identifier, the floor identifier, the unit identifier, and so on. So this is what really allows humans, let's say, to distinguish an address from, for example, the neighboring one. Okay, that's in a nutshell the data model. Then there's a position, very important. The position has a data type, geographic position. And if we go to geographic position, you can see that in Inspire, an address is a point. And there is also a specification and method that we will see later in the data set. Finally, just to conclude, there is also this data type address representation, that is a data type introduced to associate an address to so-called addressable objects. So other Inspire objects that can have an address associated to them, for example, a building or a cadastral parcel. Okay, that's it for OpenStreetMap. Let me move to, for Inspire, let me move to OpenStreetMap. And again, I can stay on the browser here and show you an extract of the page that Alessandro mentioned before. This is the map features wiki page. It's the very, very long list of all the tags agreed upon by the OpenStreetMap community. This is the section on addresses. Again, I don't want to be too long. What I want to mention here is that there are many tags that you can use to define an address. The most typical ones are the house number, which is typically the house number, so the identifier. For example, of a building, including, here you can have basically a number plus a letter. For example, this is still the house number. You can have the street. You typically have the street. You typically have the place, again, to define a settlement or a village. You have the postcode. You have a city. City is here used to identify the lowest administrative unit where the address is located. And then you have the country. very interesting and very important. None of these tags is mandatory. Alessandro said before, you need to have at least one tag, but there is no limit to the number of tags. So you might have objects with just one tag, for example, the house number, but you might have also an address with, I don't know, 10 or 20 tags. Okay, important for countries using other conventions, so having a hamlet, sub-district, district, province, or state, you might have other tags. For example, for Canada, you would probably use, or the community in Canada is using other province to define the province. In the US, they have states, and they are using the tag other state. So that's in a nutshell basically what OpenStreetMap tells or recommends about the data model on addresses. I switch back to the presentation and now present the two data sets that we are using in this comparison. The first one is for Inspire, and I'm particularly happy of this data set because it puts together many things I mentioned in the past, in the previous part of the workshop. The first is that, well, first, this data set was provided by colleagues at the National Land Survey of Finland. The license is CC BY 4.0. Interesting, first of all, is the fact that it is served by an implementation of OGC API features. Here you have the service endpoint, so you will have the slides, of course, and you can play with the service. Interesting is that it is partially aligned already with the draft proposal of good practice for the Inspire download services. And here, just for completeness, the GitHub link to the document, to the draft document I mentioned before. Also, it is available in flat encoding. So it is aligned with the UML to GeoJSON encoding rule that was developed within Inspire. Again, the one I mentioned before. Let me just enter a bit more into the detail here. This was a rule to map, to encode basically into GeoJSON, starting from the very same UML conceptual model of address, well, in general of Inspire. Also, some more specific rules were developed for some Inspire data themes, including addresses. So we also have a very specific set of transformation rules from the UML model I've just shown you to a GeoJSON encoding. Of course, once you have a GeoJSON, you can also, that is given that it is a flat, it has a flat data structure, you can also convert it into GeoPackage, and actually you will see GeoPackage in this exercise. But the idea is that this is a flat data structure. You will see in a minute that it's very, very immediate to not just load in a GIS, but also to really analyze in a GIS. This data set was also presented by Jari Reini from National Land Survey of Finland some days ago on June 9. There was a great session on OGC API features, so please take a look on the Inspire conference website. This is the presentation from Jari that showed exactly these addresses data set. It's important because it's covering the whole Finland, okay? So what we will do now, and I will try really to now switch to QGIS to show things in practice, is really to show you the data set and to comment once the data set is loaded in QGIS. So let me just find it. As I said, this is already an extract. It's not the whole addresses data set from Finland, but it's just an extract on Helsinki. And let me also try to put a background map here just to contextualize things a bit more. I hope that, of course, the connection will still resist. Okay, so this is Helsinki, and I just put an OpenStreetMap background map for really to show you that we are in Helsinki. Let me just try to zoom a bit on some on a portion of the data set. Okay, the tiles are coming, and what I want to show here is let me try to sorry, I cannot click the button because I have these WebEx things just on top. Okay, good. Let me do like that. Okay, good. Okay, so I just clicked one data set so that we can have a look together at the attributes. The first thing I want to show you while looking at these data sets, let's just look at the map for the moment. it's first of all clear that the data sets are referred to a building. So we have a data set that typically falls inside the building, and as confirmed by colleagues in the National Land Survey of Finland, so a data set identifies the building in this convention. On the right, you have we basically have the list of attributes and their values. So we can see first of all that we have a flat data structure, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago. This is in line with the GeoJSON encoding for addresses. I would invite you to take a look at the link to really see that the names of these attributes really come from that rule that was defined and agreed in that specific Inspire action. There are really the links to the code list values if you want to really look at the meaning of these attributes. And I would maybe just switch now to OpenStreetMap, and then we will compare, because I don't want to now go into a lot of detail of this data set. Let me just maybe limit to the most important components, the three components out of the 4 address components I mentioned before. So if you remember, there were 4 address components. The first one was the thoroughfare name, that is the name of the street. The second was the postal descriptor, that is the postcode, and then the admin unit name component. Here there are 2 such components. Admin unit name 1 is the country, okay, that is Finland, and the admin unit name 4 is the basically the city, that is Helsinki in that case. Now moving to OpenStreetMap, I will switch back for a minute on the slide just to present you the dataset. So in this case, we decided to show you a totally different example, and in particular, let's say a very good example of a data set in OpenStreetMap that has nothing to do with Helsinki, but it's in Italy. And the reason is that it's once again an example of an import from the province of Biella, which is a province located in the northwest of Italy. It's an input performed in 2016 and 2017. As I said before, all the imports should be described and documented. Here is the link where the import is documented. Also very important, an import is only possible where the license of the data is compatible with the ODBL. In that case, the license was CC BY 3.0 IT. That is not by default compatible with ODBL, but there was an explicit consent by the municipality, by the province of Biella to import into OpenStreetMap. So this is why it was actually possible to import these addresses datasets. To download these datasets, I would like to take a risk here and use a plugin. Let's see if it will actually work. Because I take the chance also to show you a very simple tool to download OpenStreetMap data into QGIS. The plugin is called Quick OSM. You can find it among the QGIS plugins, and what it allows to do is to basically make a search, a filter by tag, or by tags, and to basically download datasets. It is based on the Overpass API already mentioned by Alessandro. What I will do now here is to look for house number, or actually is to look for all objects having a house number tag. Then I would also like to make, let's say, an AND filter, so to add another condition, for example, on the street. It is not actually possible directly from this dialog, but I need to, I can do that from here. First, I need to select where I want to download the data. For example, you can download data only on the current extent of the map in QGIS. What I will do here is simply to select Biella, that is our province, and then I can show the query. This is the Overpass XML query language that basically tells me that I'm downloading data in Biella. I'm also by default downloading nodes, I'm downloading ways, and I'm downloading relations with that tag. So I'm basically downloading data sets having key equal to other house number and any possible value. In this case, I'm not really interested in ways, so I will remove the part of the query for ways, and I'm not interested in relations, and I don't want this union between the 3 queries. But what I want to do is also to add another conditions, Again, I cannot do that from this plugin. Look from the previous dialog. I can only do that from here. But again, this is just because it's this plugin. As Alessandro said, there is Overpass Turbo. There is a web interface, very powerful to write this kind of queries. Actually, not in XML language, but in another and slightly different query language. So that's my query. Sorry, there's okay, so this should be correct. So I want, just summarizing, to download data into Biella. I want to download only nodes having this key and this key. Suppose that in this example, and I start running the query because it will take a while. In this example, suppose that I say, okay, for me, an address can be downloaded. I mean, it is an address when it has at least the house number and the street. And then, okay, area 0 calls back area 0, that is Biella. I hope that the connection will support me. It takes a while, of course, because there are about 62,000 addresses, but at the end it should work. I can already maybe show you a preview of what we should get at the end, and if it takes too much, I can move on from here. One first thing that we can comment from here, just before the query completes, is that in Biella, and more in general in Italy, you can very clearly see that usually addresses are not associated to the buildings, but are associated to the very specific point of the building where we find in the real world the address identifier. That's because in other countries we usually have one address for each building or for each building unit. In Italy, we might have many different addresses. You can see an example here for the same building. So the convention of the OpenStreetMap community, but also in the official databases, of course, because this is a governmental data set, is that you should map the address exactly at that position, because if you are using, for example, a navigation service based on OpenStreetMap data, you would like your routing, your navigation software to bring you exactly at the entrance, so exactly at the place that is defined, is represented by the address. I forgot to say one thing before. In OpenStreetMap, an address, and it was also clear from the query that I've just modified, in principle, an address might be associated to different objects. In Italy, typically the convention is to use a node for addresses. But as I was just saying, in other countries, and another example is Germany, the convention, so the guidelines from the OpenStreetMap community are a bit different, and typically contributors are recommended to associate addresses to the building, so to a way, not to a node in the OpenStreetMap jargon. Because in those cases, an address, there is only one address for a building. Of course, there are pros and cons for that. The cons is that if a building is between two different roads, is at the crossing between two roads, and again, you might not know where the entrance of the building is. So the navigation software might bring you not to the very exact position of the entrance. Okay, so it's still loading here. So I'm sorry to say that maybe it's taking. Not sure, it's taking a lot of time. Let me maybe close QGIS. I'm sorry because I think the WebEx, the fact that I'm using the video also does not really help, but I can reopen QGIS because of course I have the data sets also saved locally, so we can have a look at it together. Also, I placed a timeout of 25 seconds. That was probably not sufficient. While QGIS starts back, I would like to show you the differences between the data models. Okay. Let me see if we have QGIS already. No. QGIS is still loading. So let me just come to this slide, and then we will see the data really in live. Of course, sorry for that. But yeah, as usually, connection issues happen. So this is basically the mapping. Again, what we could have done was to take the full Inspire mapping table for addresses that allows you to really fill a very big table that maps one application schema from Inspire to a target application schema. And in this case, this was not really needed because we wanted to be a bit quicker and to just identify the limited area of overlapping between the two data models. Limited, but as you can see, already very comprehensive, because the tags in OpenStreetMap, or actually the attributes in Inspire that we could refer to tags in OpenStreetMap were basically only these 5 that together already identify very well an address. Let me start from the house number that corresponds to this address. If you remember, when I showed you the UML data model, this was exactly the way that this data set used to identify an address, with the locator, designator, and then the address identifier general. That is basically the building number. The street corresponds to the component thoroughfare name attribute. In Inspire, the postcode is the postal descriptor, and then the 2 admin unit names attributes here correspond to the city and the country. Then there are also some attributes that are not present in this specific Inspire dataset, but have a correspondence in OpenStreetMap. For example, for Inspire, the 4th address component was the address area name. That was the place in OpenStreetMap. As I said, this is used to identify, if needed, the village or the settlement where the address is located. The same meaning has this tag in OpenStreetMap, or actually this key. Sorry, I'm calling them tags. Of course, a tag is the key equal to a value, but basically the meaning is clear. So these are more correctly speaking keys. And then if the position specification had a value equal to entrance in Inspire, that would correspond to the key entrance in OpenStreetMap that is used to exactly identify the entrance of a building, for example. In our Finnish dataset, the position specification is equal to building, exactly because of the reason I mentioned before. So that those addresses are used to identify a building and not the entrance in that specific case. Let me close, and then we come back to QGIS. There are also attributes available in this specific Inspire dataset, but that do not have a correspondence in OpenStreetMap. So this is really let's say the missing intersections between the data models. As you can see, they are very, very specific attributes, like the locator level, that is the level to which the locator refers. The position default, that is just yes or no, specifies whether or not this position should be considered the default. Position method is the description of how and by whom the geographic position of the address in Inspire was created or derived. In this Finnish example, it was by third party. And then, if you remember, we also add in Inspire a way to associate an address to other objects, for example, a building and a parcel in our data set. How to do that in Inspire, in OpenStreetMap? In OpenStreetMap, the philosophy is a bit different, because again, the idea is that in OpenStreetMap we have nodes, ways, and relation. Each can have as many tags as we want. If we want to really associate an address to something else, we might have 2 different things to do. One is to associate the tags of an address to the other object, and that's something that happens, for example, for buildings sometimes, but also for commercial activities, for POIs in general. So POIs in OpenStreetMap might have, and it would be nice to show you maybe in QGIS. Now we have QGIS, so let me try to load the OpenStreetMap dataset. That should be this one. Okay, this is Biella addresses, and if I query just one point, what we can see here is the following. Okay, In this data set, we have values for basically the city, the house number, the postcode, and the street. So you might notice that there is not the country, but also the fact that you can see all these names here, sorry, all these keys, additional keys, means that there is at least one point in this data set that has this attribute with a value, of course. So for that specific point I clicked, there are no values, but it means that in some cases addresses are associated to, for example, the example I was mentioning, POIs. POIs are, for example, restaurants. Take an example. Restaurants might have other tags like contact email, contact phone, the name, the phone information website, and so on. I was saying that in OpenStreetMap, you might also associate an address information to the object, to the POI, for example, or to the building. Or the other way that is more similar to what is happening in Inspire is to define a relation. The relation is the third data structure available in OpenStreetMap, presented by Alessandro before, that was not really used for the addresses, but in principle, you might also define a relation that, for example, relates an address to all the commercial activities having that address. This is sometimes done in practice, but it's not really a diffused practice. Why does this happen? Again, the philosophy is very different, but for example, suppose that you want to make a query using Overpass API, for example, on the POIs. I want to extract all the restaurants in Italy. If I extract the restaurants only using the tag that in that case is amenity equal to restaurant, what I would find is just the notes or the ways of the restaurants. At that point, some of them will have an address, some of them will have not an address if the address is not added to the object. So there's a different, and there is a more, let's say, open open approach in OpenStreetMap that is basically left to contributors. Also, and this is one of the reasons for the lack of interoperability for some specific use cases in OpenStreetMap, there are sometimes different communities that are following slightly different guidelines and recommendations. For example, very clear, as I mentioned before, the address might be associated to a node, to the entrance of a building, like it happens in Italy, and to a building as it happens in Germany, for example, or in Finland. Now, okay, let me also maybe come back to the Inspire for a while, just to conclude what I was saying before. So let me just zoom to the layer again in Helsinki, and let me just select one point here to comment quickly that in this case the position specification is the building, position method is by other party, position default is true. Here you can see the identifier, locator level is site level, and here we have the links, the IDs of the buildings and the parcels that address corresponds to. Okay, and of course we have the Inspire ID. Then, just to conclude to go on with the exercise, the first thing we did is to really make the transformation between the two. I can try to do that using the process modeler, and let me try and see if it works. Otherwise, we will just use the slide. So the process modeler is something very, very powerful in QGIS that allows to really concatenate together different processing algorithms in QGIS. So here, what I did was to use the processing modeler from QGIS to build a very simple ETL tools that basically does the following. And then I will switch to QGIS. Okay, that does the following. First of all, so we start from the Inspire finished dataset. We add new fields with the names of the target data model in OpenStreetMap, and we map the values according to the mapping. Then we change the values of the country. If you remember, that country was not actually including the value Finland or FI. but it included Suomi, which is the Finnish name for Finland. In OpenStreetMap, that is our target data model, you have to use the 2 letters ISO code. So we will also make this this change, and then we will remove all the original Inspire fields. Basically, this is done through, could be done through the QGIS processing modeler. If you don't know that, that is a very powerful tool, because you are just concatenating different processing tools without writing a single line of code. So here there's an example. Basically, I created a new field called house number by taking the value of that field: locator, designator, address, identifier, general. So I do the same for these 5 fields. Then here I change the value of the country field into FI. And finally, I drop all the original fields that are available in the Inspire data model. Let me just try to see if it actually works and if it does not take so much. And okay, I will, yes. So I need just to select which is the input data set for that. And then this basically executes the ETL. Of course, the data set is huge. Well, should not be so slow. It should take something like maybe 1 minute, but okay, let's leave it and let's go on with the next one. So here, the slides that we will share with you include all the details if you want to redo the exercise. I will also share a link to a GitHub repository with the datasets in case you really want to replicate this work. So that's the detail of what I've just said. And that's the data set transformed. Believe me that at the end you only have the target fields. Okay, in OpenStreetMap also we had to use some ETL processing to do a couple of things. I said that in our case the country was missing. Country might be missing in OpenStreetMap because sometimes it is, let's say, taken for granted because of course it falls within a very specific boundary. Also the other city might be avoided in principle, because if the point is correctly positioned and if the boundary of the city is correct, then it's just a matter of looking at where that address is actually included. But again, this shows the freedom that is left to OpenStreetMap contributors. So in that case, there was an ETL needed, and what I did was to remove, in that case, all the addresses in Biella that did not have a postcode. Okay, just that it was my choice. Of course, as I said, the postcode could be derived from the city. I added the country, and also I changed the data type. That's the difference. Also in OpenStreetMap, everything is a string. So the postcode that was an integer in Inspire, in this case, I decided to just keep the Inspire data type as integer for the postcode and change this data type from string to integer. And basically at the end of the exercise, I merged the 2 data sets together. That is what I wanted to show you also in practice. But I think, yeah, it's still running. So not sure really if it's better to wait or not. I think what I did is quite clear, and you might want to just use the GitHub resources that we will share with you to replicate the exercise. And of course, if you have any question, then you can contact us. But that is just to say, and let me just come back and finish with the presentation, that at the end, we really achieved a single merged data set with only our 5 different columns that were those corresponding to the intersections about the 2 data sets. That's basically it. Again, we will share these slides on the Inspire conference website, and we will also share the slides, but also the data sets and these ETL tools as QGIS processing modeler files. There are specific files for that on this GitHub repository in case you just want to practice or to replicate the exercise and have a look at what we did in the slides. I propose, if Alessandro agrees, to conclude with a Slido poll and then maybe to have some Q&A session, or maybe I would simply ask Alessandro to summarize the most recurring questions in the chat, and maybe we can have a short discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Marco. I think we could go to the Slido poll, and then I have tracked some of the first mainly questions and answered to some of the ones I followed in the chat, but other users, other participants were interacting, so it was really a great discussion.
Okay, thanks. So you should be able now to answer this question that is basically asking you to what extent you would recommend to further work to facilitate the integration between Inspire and OpenStreetMap data. Of course, I imagine that each of you is thinking to specific use cases or requirements or data sets. So let's see how many people survived also to that session. 28 for the moment.
Yeah, and then the recommendation doesn't imply that's it may be easy to do that, but yeah, it implies maybe a possibility to think about that. Or maybe the risk to have a moderate or some extent only could be related to thinking about difficulties or risks from different perspectives. Yeah.
Okay, I'm positively surprised that there is no one answering not at all. So happy to see that at least there is some interest, or at least some potential to really work on these integration between these apparently very different words. So I think there are no more questions. So I would go to the very last one, and maybe we will keep it open because this is an open question for you, and this is the reason why we kept it for the end of the presentation. Do you have any significant or real-world use case, or do you recommend any specific data set or theme or service that would benefit from an integration between the two? So here we would like to hear some proposals. Maybe you already have a very good use case that would benefit from an integration, or a data set, or something that is about what you are doing. I understand that you should think a bit more to this question, so feel free to think. I will leave it open so that maybe we can move to the discussion here, and I will pass to Alessandro. And in the meantime, feel free to answer this question, and feel free to really throw in your ideas, of course.
Okay. So we used our 1 hour and a half, but probably we can have a few minutes discussion. I have some questions noted down, but if any of the participants would like to have to open the microphone and have ask questions in general, maybe we can have a couple of minutes, a few minutes for a few questions, and maybe if they are not equal to the one I noted down, then we can go through the other ones I have in my notes. So please, if anyone want to add something or ask one specific question, please. Maybe some of the questions are entering in the poll as in some way.
We have our data set in the meantime.
Yes, if anybody is so brave to ask questions, maybe I can use a couple of them that happened in the discussion. One, of course, one of the first was about dealing with official boundaries. This is something always tricky because it's complicated also for countries to agree on that. OpenStreetMap is one vision trying to have a discussion on which border or boundary represent and how to do that. But of course, usually this could be not agreed by official governments. I think that in the discussion was also answered this. Probably it's one of the trickiest things from an official point of view. So my suggestion is not to think about OpenStreetMap only from the official bordering perspective, because there are a lot of other information. And usually these questions is mainly related when you use OpenStreetMap as a baseline layer. So customizing this, as in the example we showed from the GSCO database, let's say, modifying the things from your perspective as an official document could be a solution if you have the need to do that. Another issue was related to licensing and integration about dataset with different licenses is problematic. The openness of the database usually is in OpenStreetMap usually is an issue when we want to import dataset that has to be compatible. We had one question from I don't remember, Jeff Conan, and he was saying that in that case the land use is officially in CC0, and it's not possible to be integrated in OpenStreetMap. So it's something that has to be discussed probably in more detail and for that specific case. And sorry, yeah, we have 5 minutes more to maybe also wrap up with the poll. One other thing is a question from Esa Tiainen. It was asking about how it's possible to ensure the coverage of data in OSM. I think it's interesting. If you think about some specific area and some specific tags, let's say, it's possible, and sometimes it's really covered. If you think about streets or buildings, sometimes you find area that are really covered totally. If you think about crosswalks or let's say the width of the sidewalks in an area, they are so specific that it's difficult to ensure coverage. Importing authoritative dataset is one way to cover a lot of more information, but probably also authoritative data, it not always cover everything in the country. Yeah, and
Alessandro, sorry, I'm
yes.
copying the GitHub, the link to GitHub in the chat, so
Good.
that you have it. Sorry, I didn't have time to put the presentation. I will do it immediately after, so you can still find the data sets already, but not the presentation.
Yeah, there's now Kasia mentioning integration of cycling the pedestrian network from OpenStreetMap. Sometimes it's really one of the main uses of OpenStreetMap to have cycling tracks really mapped in the mountains or in outermost regions, and pedestrian information to talk about accessibility of urban spaces, for example. This is one of the use cases that is currently quite interesting in OpenStreetMap, and not yet fully covered, of course.
And if I can add, Alessandro, in the past, I made quite a lot of research on comparison between OpenStreetMap and authoritative data sets. And if we think to how OpenStreetMap was born, it was born starting from streets. So streets were the very first thing that was mapped, and then buildings came. So streets are typically very, very, very complete with a lot of detail. Detail, as you have just said. So if you are looking for street data sets, you should probably, and you don't have alternatives, you should probably look at OpenStreetMap. There was a recent paper saying that the OpenStreetMap map of streets worldwide is 83% complete. Of course, taking into account any place in the world, with, of course, very clear differences between developed and underdeveloped or developing countries.
Yeah, one thing I was looking here, the question from Dian about integration with real-time data, traffic sensors, water levels. They are not integrated in the database, and just mentioned so that it can be integrated from a different level. So in other services, for example, elevation data is not in the database, but it can be integrated to represent elevation data in apps or map services. I'm thinking also about other type of information like street imagery. There's tools like Mapillary or OpenStreetMap that can integrate the view on the street of a street in OpenStreetMap with some imagery live, with some integration of open tools, of course. But it's another point, not in the OSP database.
Alessandro, I think we
Yeah.
we have to close quite soon.
Yes.
There were some questions in the chat, and I think there is still some interest from many people to continue this
That's
discussion. There might be many ways to continue the discussion, but I can suggest for the moment the Inspire Community Forum. That is basically a forum for discussions within the Inspire community. I can maybe paste the link in the chat. It's just find it. There was already sorry, Community Forum Inspire. There was already a discussion open on that. This is the link, and if you look for Inspire and OpenStreetMap, you should, looking for the chat here, you should probably find a conversation. If not, feel free to open a new one, and if there is, sorry, I cannot see the chat anymore. Well, okay, this is the link. Sorry, I cannot see the chat anymore. I think I moved the... Yeah, I move it here. Okay, here it is. So I would really point you all to this forum to further this discussion on the possible integration. It's very, very useful to hear different points of view from both OpenStreetMap experts, Inspire experts, data providers, data users, and so on and so forth. Youth has also pointed to a mailing list about scientific applications of OpenStreetMap that, yeah, where we are sometimes posting content. Maybe, yeah, maybe we could have something similar about government. That would be maybe a good suggestion. So we should discuss maybe just about that. So I would close the meeting here, unfortunately, because we have to close, but once again, I would like, on behalf of both of us,
Yes.
thank you all for your presence here. It was interesting to see that there is interest, and that you recognize the potential of some further work to explore how these two different parallel lines can meet can meet more in the future. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Please be in touch and feel free to contact us, and let's stay in touch and continue this discussion.
Yes. Thank you, Marco. Thank you, the Inspire team, for the web conference, and all the participants.
Bye-bye, and enjoy the next webinars in the Inspire conference. Thank you.
Yes.